All right, I call to order this meeting of the Assembly's Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee of the Whole. Today's February 17th. We're noticed from 11 to 12. Please call the roll.
Ms. Allard?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy? France? Mr. Presberdia? Mr. Peterson? Ms. Quinn Davidson? Mr. Rivera? Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
And Ms. Zalatel?
Here. Thank you so much. We do have a number of members traveling right now and out of town, but this is being recorded and they'll be able to catch up. So we have a really full agenda today. And we're gonna go ahead. Ms. Kennedy is here. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And start right off with the first item on the agenda. And Ms. Allard is here as well. Fantastic. We're gonna start with the Eklutna Hydroelectric Project update. We have 5 items on the agenda in an hour, so just be mindful of time. If you can just do a quick introduction as you kick your item off, and I will turn it over to CEA.
Hi, this is Julie Haskett from TWG Electric. Thanks for allowing us to be here again for the update. From TWG today, we have myself, Matt Clarkson, and then Samantha Owen is our project manager for Eklutna, who's going to make the presentation. I'm trying to talk fast because I know you guys have little time. And I see Tony Zellers from MEA. I'm not sure if anybody else from MEA is on. So do you want any further introductions or have Samantha just go into the presentation?
I say we just go for it, and if they answer a question or anything else later, they can give an introduction. I will note at 11:01, Mr. Rivera joined us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Julie. As Julie said, my name is Samantha Owen with McMillan Jacobs Associates, and I'm the project manager, if you guys have not met me before. And I'm just going to jump right in to the presentation. We're just providing you guys an update with what's been going on since October. I think that's the last time we met with you. So since then, we've expanded our project team, established new technical work groups, had some technical work group meetings, and then the bulk of the work has been drafting our year 1 study reports and year 2 study plans. So we'll get into all of that real quick. Before we jump into that, I think we showed this reminder slide at the last meeting, and I thought we'd keep it in just to keep people on track with where we are in the process. So the 1991 Fish and Wildlife Agreement requires us, the project owners, to go through kind of a 4-step process regarding the study program. We have to look at the impacts of the hydro project on fish and wildlife, develop proposals for protection, mitigation, and enhancement of fish and wildlife affected by that hydro development, consider the impact of fish and wildlife measures on, I'm just going to say other stuff. Here we have electric ratepayers, municipal water utilities, recreational users, and adjacent land use, and then evaluate ways to mitigate those impacts. So a very comprehensive look at what's going on in the basin. In our first year of the study program, we focused mainly on aquatics related resources, really diving into that kind of numbers 1 and 2. And now that we're moving into our second year of the study program, we're starting to look at kind of that other group of resources, things like recreation and cultural resources, terrestrial wildlife, things like that. So with that in mind, knowing that we were going to start expanding our focus areas for our study program, we also brought on some new team members as part of our project team with technical experts in wetlands and wildlife coming from ABR. Recreation is being done by R&M consultants, and then cultural resources being done by cultural resource consultants. All 3 of these firms are Alaska-based firms, so that's makes it much easier when scheduling things like site visits. And we conducted a few site visits back in September and October with our new team members just to get them familiar with the area, boots on the ground, explaining kind of the intricacies of this project and the unique features that we have going on out there. So there's a couple of good pictures of us out there in I believe October timeframe. Again, because we know that we're going to be looking at some of these new focus areas in our second year of study, we established some new technical work groups. So you guys might remember that back in 2020, we established our kind of original technical work group. And again, because we were so focused on aquatics related resources early on, we've dubbed that the Aquatics Technical Work Group. This past fall, we also established a terrestrial technical work group, which is going to focus on things like wetlands and wildlife, a recreation technical work group focusing on recreation not only around the lake and the river itself, but also down in the tail race where the powerhouse is, and then the cultural resources technical work group. And this is looking at kind of a wide variety of things, maybe some of the more traditional cultural resources that we would look at, like historic resources, archaeological resources, but also taking into account things like culturally sensitive areas that are important to the native village of Eklutna, and where all of that is being closely coordinated with the native village. So you'll see that we have a variety of entities and agencies that are participating in one or more of our technical work groups, kind of just, dependent on their particular expertise. Native Village is being represented in all 4 of the technical work groups. Fish and Game is in many of them as well. And then you can just kind of see there down the list. But we've tried to reach out to all of our stakeholders that have that kind of technical expertise in those resource areas to help us with the study planning process, and then also reviewing any technical documents that come out of study implementation. Moving right along. Can you guys see that? Sorry, just wanted to confirm.
I see the November TWG slide.
Okay. Great, perfect. I think I'm also having some weird technical difficulties on my end. I can't see what you guys are seeing. Okay, so in November, we actually met with all of our technical work groups. So again, we've been meeting with our aquatics technical work group, periodically for the past 2 years or so, but this was our first time to meet with the other 3 technical work groups as well. And at those November meetings, we presented kind of some preliminary results from our first year of study. And we also presented what we call our proposed study program framework for our second year of study. And that's just, what studies we think we're going to do, what those studies are going to generally focus on, maybe some general methods and schedule outlines for each of those studies, and tried to get some initial feedback from each of our technical work groups, and before we delved into developing very detailed study plans. So I think those meetings were extremely successful. We got a lot of great feedback. And then we were able to move on with developing study reports and study plans over the winter. But this table just shows you kind of from a very high level standpoint, kind of what we're proposing for our second year of study. There are several studies from year 1, from 2021 last year, that will be continued into year 2. And this is either because, the effort itself, takes a significant amount of time, right, for the geomorphology and sediment transport study and the in-stream flow study. Both of those studies require us to develop models. So we collected all the data this past year, and now we're kind of in that data analysis and model development phase. So it's just kind of, bleeding into year 2. Other things like our fish species composition and distribution study down in the river, and then the fish study that we had going up in the lake, and water quality and stream gauging. Those studies are things we're just going to kind of repeat certain aspects of that study in year 2, just to have a second year of data, right? We don't, 1 year might be a weird year, and we want to make sure we have a second year of data for some of that stuff to just kind of confirm what we think we know. And then new studies that are being proposed to be initiated in this second year of study are things like our engineering feasibility and cost assessment. This is looking at, we've had a lot of input from our stakeholders about what kind of fish and wildlife protection and mitigation measures might be warranted, and what kind of benefits those would have to fish. We also need to know if those things are feasible first, and if they're feasible, what they would cost, right? So this gets back into that cost to ratepayers component that the 1991 agreement requires us to look at. Also things like a hydrovaluation study. So if we, were to put water down the river for fish, that means there's going to be less water for power generation. And how does that impact the value of the hydro project and cost to ratepayers and things like that as well? So kind of a multi-step look at costs there. And then we have our things like our wetlands and wildlife habitat study. We're going to be developing a very comprehensive wetlands and wildlife habitat map. And to go with that, we have some terrestrial surveys for wildlife that's going to be going on, things like moose and bear and beaver and migratory waterfowl and other shore birds that we know are utilizing that area, just to get a really good sense of what's there. We also have a recreation study. Again, this is going to be looking at not just the lake, but also the tail race, and not necessarily looking at what kind of, what is everyone's wish list for recreational facilities, because I think that would be outside of the scope of this study. But our purpose for this study is looking at what is the recreational use that is happening there. So we can really define, who's out there, what are they doing, how many people are out there, when, what times of year, things like that. So when we start to look at potentially making modifications to the project for fish and wildlife, we can then circle back and see how that might impact the recreational use that's happening in the area. And then also the cultural resources study. So again, when we start to look at those potential fish and wildlife mitigation measures, we can then circle back and see how would that impact other cultural resources in the area. So making that very holistic analysis. And then looking ahead to our schedule. So this is our study reporting and planning schedule for the rest of this spring or so. What was that, Friday, February 11th, we actually distributed the draft year 1 study reports and draft year 2 study plans to the appropriate technical work groups and parties to the 1991 agreement, as well as some other key stakeholders. And they are going to have a month to review and comment on those documents. The comment deadline is March 11th. And then about a week or two later, the week of March 21st, we're going to be scheduling a series of technical work group meetings. So again, 1 meeting per technical work group, so 4 meetings total. And that's just an opportunity for us to kind of go through, review the comments we received, identify any of those kind of more substantive comments that warrant further discussion, and figure out ways to address those as a group. And then April 1st, April Fool's Day, I guess, we're going to be distributing the proposed final study plans to the parties to the 1991 agreement. This is the same process we followed this past year, and it goes back to some language in the 1991 agreement that says we need to get concurrence from the parties on the scope of work in the study plan. So thankfully, we already ironed out what that process looks like during our first study planning year. And now we're just going to kind of rinse and repeat for year 2, which is why the parties have received the draft study plans in this review and comment period. And then going into April, we are hoping to. Yep.
A quick time check with you, maybe a couple more minutes, because I want to leave some space for questions. Thanks.
Absolutely. This is my last slide. Perfect. So just then going into April, we're going to be receiving state and federal concurrence letters, and then we have to submit things to AEA as the governor's representative for their feedback as well. And overall, our goal is to finalize the study reports and the study plans by mid-May or so. The intent is because our field season will be starting again in late May, and we want to get all the necessary approvals in place before that starts. And then at that time, all the draft and final versions of all those documents will be put up onto the project website and made available for public download. So I'll stop there because I know we're short on time, and just see if there's any questions.
All right, thanks so much, and thanks for being mindful of the time. Any questions on this update? I am not seeing any, and of course, members know how to reach you all if they do have any questions later. So thanks again for the update. We always appreciate when you come and keep us in the loop, and always very thorough. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye. All right, we're going to move on to our next item, which is with AWU and discussing fluoridation of water in Girdwood. I believe Mr. Porcino is here to present for AWU.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to present. I don't have that capability, but I got a number of questions from the Assembly on February 4th, and we provided written response. I think Amy sent that off this morning. Do you want me to just read the questions and responses?
Sure. And I'm just
Okay.
checking to see if I have the response and if it's been distributed to members, but you can go ahead and we'll make sure everyone's got them. Thanks.
Okay, it looks like I'm allowed to present, so go, here it is. So essentially the questions were, the specific questions are, is AU's fluoridation system in GERD operating now? The answer is no. If not, how long has it been offline? It's been offline since August of 21. It had been offline because of a pump failure in March. We got a replacement pump. It took a long time because of shipping and just parts being hard to get. But it was not operating reliably, and it's really not the only suitable problem to it, which leads to the next question. The nature of the problem. The reality is it's a 20-plus-year-old system. High maintenance, said multiple components failed and replaced over time, and as a result, it's no longer providing consistent and reliable fluoride and is needed replacement, the whole system. What's preventing it from operating? I think that's, the fact that it was once a complete whole system, it no longer is, and it really, because it's a small system, we don't have operators there 24/7. It needs a new engineered system, which is what we're planning to do, which is the fix, which is we're going to make sure that we're actually have an active project to rehab the well there anyway for other reasons, which are extremely important. And as part of that replacement and rehab project, we are going to put a new engineered holistic system in there to take care of this. This will not occur, unfortunately, until it won't be fully commissioned until 2024. The couple things, though, to note, GERDA does have naturally occurring fluoride, which is a good thing. Right, wrong, or indifferent. As I said in the last meeting, GERDA has a historical checkered history with respect to being online. It was offline from 2013 to 2015, 2010, and other times over its history. Because it's a small system, that's actually very common on small systems to have these systems offline. They're just harder to manage because they're smaller. They're different types of systems than like at Eklutna, which operates 95% of the time plus. So it's just one of those unfortunate circumstances. We'll be back online with that project completion, and we don't need additional funding. First quarter budget revisions simply because it's already funded. So I'll leave it at that and open up to questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Corsentino. Ms. Demboski noted that she emailed these answers to all members of the Assembly and the clerk this morning. So thanks for the update. I actually don't see any questions in the queue right now. I'm sure as members get a chance to read this and digest it, there may be some follow-up, but I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your time today.
All right, thank you so much.
Oh, wait, sorry, not off the hook that easy. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I can actually take an answer offline if that's easier, because this might be a little bit more of a detailed question than you're ready for, Mr. Corsentino. But my question is in regard to the quantity of fluoride. You mentioned that there was already a natural occurrence of fluoride in the Girdwood water. Do you know? Can you tell me what that is, and if that meets kind of the other guidelines that have been used for fluoridation, or how far off we might be what we were typically fluoridating the water with? Thanks.
Yes and yes. So the short answer is it's naturally occurring about 1 part per million. The targeted optimal dose is it ranges from 0.6 to 0.7, which is what we dose at. So it is lower, but it's not the optimal dose. Just means it plateaus as the maximum benefit to prevent cavities. It doesn't mean the lower numbers don't prevent cavities too, just not as good as it would at the optimal dose. So it is under what we'd like it to be, but it does still provide some benefit.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. So she opened the floodgate of questions here. So Mr. Weddleton, then Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton, please go ahead.
This is totally out of Mark's regime, but it'd be really interesting to do a study of are there more cavities in Girdwood since it's been over a year. So who's going to do that? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. We'll see if anyone volunteers. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm reading through the memo here. So it hasn't been off for a whole year, right? It was on for at least part of 2021.
Correct.
Okay. And How well, I assume, you know, John, for better or worse, John and Suzanne are the ones who get to have the closest contact with Girdwood. How well is this sort of known in Girdwood? And is there any mitigation that folks could take? You know, I know, like, for example, when I was a kid, we had the fluoride doses that we had to bite down on, things like that for the, because it looks like it's going to be offline for at least another full year. Is that right?
It is, although that's what I'm putting in writing. We're going to try to see if there's additional parts and components we can work with, but it's kind of a lower priority compared to the well upgrades themselves. So the short answer is we may try to do some additional things, but officially I want to make folks know, make sure folks understand that it could be off this long. And it's not uncommon for that in Girdwood. And to answer your other questions, Forrest, it was, you know, unfortunately, the notification to the community that when it's been offline over the past years, the last decade plus, we never really provided notification other than the GBOS and relied on them. And we're going to meet with GBOS again, the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, and to make them aware of this. And we're happy to work with the health department, MOA and health department, to get the message out further, take feedback. It's a work in progress. It's just, again, I have to reiterate, to me, it's really important that we focus on the safe drinking water provisions and understanding it's very common for small water utilities, which is what Girdwood is, because it's completely separate from Anchorage, to be out of service or just not even fluoridated at all because of the challenges associated with fluoridation of small systems. It's a different system, different chemical. It's just more challenging to operate, particularly because we just don't have staff there all the time, unlike Oklahoma.
Okay, thank you. So I guess to just rephrase what you said, well, there must have been some conversation with GBOS last year after the original break, I assume, but recently there hasn't been a brief to GBOS, but there will be one soon. Is that what you said?
I believe there is a meeting coming up and they've asked us to attend, and we'll bring this up. Yes. I don't have the exact date, but we'll make sure we give them notice.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Corsentino, for joining us and providing the memorandum.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Next, we're going to turn to the North Stabilization Project, and I believe David Ames from Jacobs is with us today. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is David Ames from Jacobs. Thank you. I'm down at the port right now. Would you like me to share my presentation, or is some central location showing it?
Now, if you can go ahead and share, if you're comfortable doing that, that would be fantastic.
Yep. Perfect. Great. Okay. Okay. Are you all seeing the presentation now?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay, so the North Extension Stabilization, this was requested in the last committee meeting to just give an update on what the status of that is. The North Extension of Stabilization, or the North Extension, I should say, as most of you probably know, is the past repairs done in the early, or the past attempts done in the early 2000s to reclaim land to expand the port at that time. That area is now considered seismically unstable and unstable in normal conditions as well. And as part of the port modernization program, that area needs to be stabilized, demolished and stabilized. So the North Extension Stabilization Step 1, known as NES1, is part of Phase 2, which, as you all know, includes the replacement of terminals 1 and 2 of the general cargo docks. The project itself will cut back the existing bulkhead, demolish it and remove the reclaimed land, and stabilize the slope with a riprap this has two purposes. It will stabilize the unstable slope. It will also, in this particular phase, cut back the area to allow for safer navigation within. Hold on one second. I think I want to switch this. Okay, so you can see it a little better. For safer navigation in the areas near Terminal 3 and at the north end of the terminal. The second step of stabilization, NES2, is to stabilize the remaining portion. That is intended to be done in phases 4 or 5 once phases 2 and 3, which include the cargo docks plus the new petroleum terminal, are done and would be done as part of the demolition of Terminal 3. Current plans, NES1 is current phase. It's got a budget, construction and design budget of roughly $125 million. Permitting efforts are underway. We're working on those already. The design build RFP is expected to be released in May or June of this year. And then design would commence, and construction, preparation for construction would be beginning as near as the end of this year, and full construction mobilization would begin in 2023. Right now, there's a riprap slope stabilization method. That's what's intended, large rock, large stone to stabilize the slope. There has been consideration of a sheet pile method, but right now, the final method will be determined during the design period. But right now, it is preliminarily designed as a riprap slope. The pictures that you see here are areas of the damaged cell on the pictures of the damaged cells of the existing bulkhead. Phase 2 is phase 4 or 5, right now intended to be done in roughly 2030. $175 million total budget when combined with Terminal 3 for demolition. This has been asked of me in the past, so I wanted to just mention that building NES2 along with NES1 is an option. It could save the city, say, $30 to $50 million for not having to remobilize to do the second phase, but it obviously would require an additional level of funding at a time when phase 2 is already looking for $1.1 billion of funding. So it currently is scheduled for later, but if the funding is available, it can't. The second stage could be done with the first phase. Before I move on to my next presentation, Madam Chair, I'll be speaking also about the change order request, or the change order authority request for Pacific Pile and Marine. But are there any questions on this, on the North Extension stabilization, before I move on?
I am not seeing anyone in the queue for questions on this portion of the presentation. So if you want to bring up your other one, I think we'll just move ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the change order authority request for the PCT construction contracts, the PCT 21 construction contract. The contractor in that is Pacific Pile and Marine. We have submitted this through the port, this change order authority request, which will authorize us to negotiate final claims on the contract and have sufficient contingency to complete the contract this year. Just as background, the original project, the PCT 21 project, was funded at $63 million, roughly. To that were added in the midst of, or during construction, the relocation of the south floating dock and dredging, maintenance dredging for 2021. The original contingency of the contract to cover various claims that arise during construction was $6.3 million, and then additional change order authority allowing us to submit validated change order requests for the contractor were added, totaling a change order authority of $13.6 million over the course of the contract. Because these additional tasks were added, south floating dock and dredging, some of the original contingency value for claims resolution was actually used to fund this additional work. And so what we're doing now is we need to increase the change order authority to date has been utilized. The only thing that remains is $2.5 million allowed for dredging only, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. And so we need to replenish the change orders for claim purposes. And just so you're aware, this is more of a heads up of what's coming in the request, which hopefully an assembly memo will be put together within the next few days to get this on the agenda for the 1st of March assembly meeting. It's possible that it won't arrive until the 15th, but we're targeting the 1st of March assembly meeting. But we're in the process of negotiating claims with the contractors. In doing so, we have validated and confirmed the values that we're recommending for payment of change orders of roughly $870,000. We have determined claims to be valued, but are still negotiating the recommended values of the claims on roughly $5 million. We are still evaluating the validity of claims of about $400,000, and then we want to have a contingency budget to take us through the remaining contract through roughly August of this year. And that's all based on the remaining work value. So this is the target change order authority. This is not a payment amount. This just gives us the negotiating room to negotiate and close out change orders. We expect the amount that we actually pay on the contract to be significantly lower than the 7.8 million. In addition to that, we expect additional dredging based on current bathymetric surveys. And this is dredging that the Corps of Engineers won't do under their maintenance contract because it's project related. And we're estimating based on the volumes and based on last year's dredging charges marked up, dredging rates marked up by 30% for this year's inflation of $4 million. Again, we don't expect to use all of that, but that's our cap amount. Now, we do have a surplus of 2.5 million for dredging that reduces our new need for dredging of 1.4 million to $1.5 million roughly. So just to summarize, the total new requested change order authority is $9.3 million, which is the 7.8 plus the 1.5. The authorization to transfer dredging change order authority from 2021 to 2022 of 2.5 million, and then we'll look at contract. We'll be changing contract completion to 2022, summer of 2022. This change order is in process. I just wanted to give you, make you aware of what was coming. I do also want to indicate that we are currently in negotiations with the contractor on the dredging value. We find this value for dredging to be extremely to be well estimated. We are getting price estimates from the contractor that we believe are overpriced, and so we are reserving the right that if we do not agree with PPM to do the dredging, that we will bid out a competitive bid on this dredging so that the city gets a fair price. So we are looking to designate these values for dredging, but it's possible that they won't be used and that we go to a separate competitive bid contract for them. So with that, I'll ask if there are any questions.
Great. Members, if you want to put yourself in the queue, if you have any questions. I do have a question. If the dredging were to have to go out for competitive bid, would it delay the work?
If we can start the process now of competitive bid and make it as rapid as possible, it shouldn't, because this closeout dredging would be done in May and June. So it would not delay completion of the terminal. It might delay the acceptance of the size of vessel that could arrive early in the season, but by the end of summer, everything would be back on schedule and all vessels would be accepted or would be able to arrive to the port. I will say that we are in discussions with the Corps of Engineers to see if there are other ways to get this work dredged or get this dredging work accomplished that might go faster. They are pretty strict about how they use their dredging equipment, so I can't say I'm optimistic about that, but we are looking for every opportunity to both get this done on schedule and also get a fair price for the city.
Great, thank you so much. And I find this chart really helpful for the change order authority requested. I don't see anyone in the queue, but before we move on, Ms. Hickel, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, ma'am, thank you. I believe Mr. Ames covered everything sufficiently.
Perfect, great, thanks. Thanks for the thorough presentation and being here today.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, we are moving right along to the last item of new business, which is the transfer of Birchwood Airport to the MOA. Mr. Gibbs, the airport manager, is online with us, I believe, today. Mr. Gibbs?
Madam Chair, could I defer to Mr. Trombley to answer at the higher level? Most of my work is in the stubby pencil that might be more appropriate for a work session.
Sure. Mr. Trombley, would you like to present?
Yeah. You know, I'll just kind of summarize what was discussed at the economic development meeting last week. And obviously everybody's seen the MOU, and just so everybody understands, that MOU is not a guarantee that the transfer is going to happen. It's more or less an understanding between the state and the city that we're going to look at the process and to see if it is in fact a good idea to transfer it. The FAA ultimately is going to make that call, and the FAA has a very detailed process associated with transferring any airports from one entity to another, and there's certain criteria that has to be met, and that's really what the MOU is going to do. You know, part of that stuff is you guys have all seen that the ordinance before us, creating a sort of department of the airports. Obviously, that's the discretion of the assembly on how that organization is going to look, and that all those things can be vetted out in a work session as well. So I'm happy to answer any other questions at a really high level. And I think in order to really bury down into the details, we probably should have a work session at some point in time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Trombley. I do have some members in the queue, and we'll try to answer questions now, but if they need to be deferred for a work session, I'll be sure to let Chair LaFrance know if that's the request. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'll say I had a constituent reach out with a number of concerns that I sent to Mr. Gibbs, and he provided those answers, which I appreciate. I think that creating a kind of frequently asked questions to put on the website for community members might be a good idea that sort of addresses some of the concerns that people in the community might have about this transfer. So I guess that's more of a comment than a question. I think we will get a few questions about this. It is a pretty major change, even though it's still a ways out. And so heading off some of those issues, I think is worth doing. The question, I guess, would be for Mr. Trombley. We did have a constituent reach out and ask if the native village of Eklutna had been consulted with at all about this. And I understand that, they don't have any formal role in this kind of FAA procedure, but I was wondering if that might be something you'd be willing to consider, maybe just speaking with them, during our meeting with the tribal council, and in passage of our ordinance recognizing them as a recognized government. One of the big points they make up is just that they like to be talked to, they like to be asked, and there is a formal consultation process for certain federal things. I don't think this falls in one of those. So I guess my two questions are: one, have you or will you consider talking to Eklutna? And two, do they have any formal role in this federal process?
Sure. So I am the mayor's point for Eklutna, and I meet with Eklutna on a regular basis. I met with them last month, and we did discuss the airport transfer. They have not come out with a position one way or the other. In a work session, I think it'd be probably really helpful to take a look at the map and understand where Eklutna's land is, because Eklutna land basically surrounds the airport. So I agree with you, Mr. Dunbar, that we should absolutely be in constant communication. And I'll make that promise to you now. My commitment to you and the assembly is that I will maintain consistent communication with them on this. So did I answer both your questions? I can't remember the other one.
Well, Madam Chair, can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yes,
Madam
of course.
So when you talk about Eklutna land, I assume then you're talking about Eklutna Corporation, right? Because the tribe doesn't hold much of any land. So I guess, and it's true that there are some similar board members for the corporation and the tribe, but I'm wondering if you've also had a chance to speak with the tribal leadership and if you're willing to do so.
Oh, absolutely. No, I have not met with them. I usually just meet with Kyle Foster, the corporation, but I'm happy to meet with the tribe as well, if you guys would like that. I'm not opposed to that at all.
Wonderful. Good. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's, a common kind of, I think people commonly think of the two as the same, and certainly I have a lot of respect for Kyle Foster and the corporation and what they're doing, but I do think that reaching out to Aaron Leggett and the tribal council, I think would just be seen as an act of goodwill, and they might have some unique thoughts on it as well. So if you're willing to do that, I would greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to help.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Next in the queue, I have Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's more of a comment. Mr. Trombley, thank you for meeting with the Eklutna Inc. I've heard really great things back from Kyle Foster about your meeting, so I believe they're on board with everything. And then I also wanted to say that I've received a couple of emails, but to be honest, they're not anybody who lives within Assembly District 2. And it seems like our community is very much for the transfer, and I appreciate that. And I believe that the majority of the community will support it, and I know I do. And I believe Ms. Kennedy, well, she's next in queue. She'll probably show you that same support. So thank you very much for all you're doing.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Allard. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm, for the most part, yes, definitely in support of the transfer. And that's really my question, though, is kind of the terminology, transfer. So I've heard transfer of management, transfer of sponsorship, and transfer of ownership. And so I know there's got to be some distinctions in all of that. But the question has been, so is this going to be something that the municipality owns, or is this strictly a management thing? And what is a sponsorship? What's the difference there? So I'm really just looking for what is the proper terminology to use when we're referring to this legal action. Thanks.
Sure. Sure. No, those are great questions. Mr. Gibbs, would you be able to help differentiate between those?
And Mr. Trombley, I see Benjamin Bowman's hand from Department of Law is also up.
Sure.
If
Okay.
like that assist as well.
Would you, Mr. Gibbs, would you prefer to take this one or should I?
Why don't you go ahead, sir, and I can follow up.
All right. So through the chair, to clarify, the term sponsorship is an FAA term in relation to airports, and it connotes ownership of the facility and also management responsibility. So that's where that term got thrown in there. The deal which is being contemplated currently would be a slow transition to where the municipality would take over ownership of the Eklutna Airport assets, land, facilities, leases, and also management responsibility of the airport and those assets, which under the terms of the FAA is the municipality being the sponsor of the airport.
Any follow-up on that?
Okay. Yeah, I'm sitting here kind of giggling to myself because it sounds like all of those terms apply in some way, shape, or form. It may just depend on what the function is that would be being dealt with at the time. So I guess all three terms are actually correct. It depends on who you're kind of working with, whether you're working with FAA at the time or if you're working with the municipality at the time. So is it safe to say that all three apply? Thanks.
Through the chair to Assemblyperson Kennedy, yes, you are correct. If we're talking about the on the ground nuts and bolts, we're talking about ownership or management. And if we're talking to the FAA, who is the federal organization that's overseeing all of this and is always in the back of all of these considerations and conversations, they call the prior two things, ownership and management, they call that sponsorship. So yes, depending on who you're talking to and what you're talking about, all three terms may apply.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Just want to note from Ms. Domboski, the correction, it's Birchwood Airport, not Eklutna. And Mr. Gates, I believe you had a follow-up to Mr. Bowman.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was wondering, Mr. Bowman, my understanding is if these municipality is going to acquire, ownership in the properties and assets, that will require assembly approval, right? So we will have that coming along at some time for assembly approval, under Title 25.
Mr. Bowman, did you?
I'm sorry, I think it might have cut out right at the end of Mr. Gates' statement on my end.
I believe it was whether or not we're going to be seeing a request for assembly approval under Title 25.
The assembly will be approving through the chair to Mr. Gates. Yes, the assembly will be given the chance to look over this deal once it's been scoped, if we reach that point. Because as Mr. Trombley stated earlier, we right now only have the MOU, which is an agreement to look into this. But if it is decided to go forward with this process and this deal, then the assembly will be the one signing off on that deal once it's started to be scoped.
Great, thank you, Mr. Bowman.
Thanks, Mr.
Okay, next I have Mr. Dunbar in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I realize this question is we're probably too early on in the process for there to be an answer to this question, but I think I want to ask it just to raise a principle that I hope will guide the negotiations, the discussions about it. So there was I can't remember the exact ordinance. Well, I don't think it was an ordinance. There was a proposal a few years ago that would have resulted in some basically general government funds being used to subsidize Merrill Field in some way. And I think we are all of us in agreement that general government funds, property tax dollars should not go to subsidize any of our utilities or enterprises. They're all kind of be self-sufficient. And when you talk about a department of the airports, I'm curious how you would see that being funded. Would it be entirely from the funds generated and federal funds received from Merrill Field and Birchwood, or would there be a general government component to that? I guess the question is for Mr. Trombley.
Sure. Most airports are self-sustaining and all the funds come through the FAA. And so we would not expect any property tax dollars to be used to fund them in any capacity. Unless, the assembly always has the ability to take property taxes out of 101 and appropriate if you guys choose to do that. But I don't think that that's what you guys want to do. And I don't think it's necessary in this.
Right. Well, thank you. And I appreciate that. And I know we had this conversation during the budget debate where it was sort of where we realized that Ms. Hickle's salary, I think either all or part of her salary is paid for by the utilities and enterprises, which I think is great. Your time, of course, is being used on this right now, Mr. Trombley. But, I think that's a little bit different than, if this became the permanent we had some permanent oversight that was being paid for by a property tax funded general 101 position that was part of the Department of the Airports if we created it. And I'll just say that I wouldn't support that. And I think what you just said is exactly right. I mean, if it's completely paid for by the FAA or by revenues generated at the airports, that's outstanding. So thank you for that answer.
Yep.
All right. I don't see any further questions on this topic. It would be really great if we could get that differentiation of those terms Ms. Kennedy raised via email. I think that's going to come up over and over again, and you incorporate them into an FAQ if that is forthcoming. But I think we just all need to really be clear on the nomenclature moving forward. So that's our last item under new business, unless anyone has any other business to bring forward. Okay, not hearing any. So committee, legislative and budget priorities and other standing items. I think for purposes of this committee right now, and just to highlight where some of our members are, is we're following the mayor's recent trip to Juneau and the passage of the legislative program. Ms. LaFrance, Mr. Peterson, and Ms. Quinn Davidson are in Juneau now, hopefully talking about the Port of Alaska, and Mr. Rivera and I will be headed down next week, and we know the mayor was just down there as well. Are there any specific budget items for 2023 or other legislative priorities anyone would like to bring forward at this time? Okay, seeing and hearing none, we're going to move on to audience participation. 3 minutes. If you are on the phone, you need to hit *6 to unmute. Is there anyone who would like to participate? Anyone at all? All right, I am not seeing anyone. So with that, I will adjourn us at 11:52. Thanks to all of our presenters and everyone for attending.